Hello everyone, I hope you are all doing well. Deep in the glacial silence of the Himalayas, where the air itself seems to hold its breath, there exists a mystery so ancient and so luminous that even the word mystery feels too small a vessel to carry it. For thousands of years, saints and sages have whispered of a figure who walks among those sacred peaks, a master who has conquered death itself, who wears a body of light as naturally as ordinary men wear flesh, and whose very name, when spoken with devotion, is said to carry the power of liberation. His name is Mahavatar Babaji, the great avatar, the deathless one, and this is not a legend passed down through dusty manuscripts, but a living, breathing reality testified to by one of the most credible spiritual witnesses of the modern age, Paramahansa Yogananda, whose autobiography of a yogi cracked open the Western world's understanding of the divine like a thunderbolt wrapped in velvet. What Yogananda gave the world in that extraordinary book was not mythology dressed in saffron robes, it was the precise, verifiable, astonishing account of a lineage of God-realized masters, a golden chain of souls stretching from the Himalayan heights down into the drawing rooms of Varanasi and the lecture halls of Los Angeles, all of them touched by the same immortal hand. That hand belonged to Babaji, a being whose physical age cannot be determined, whose biography contains no birth certificate, no childhood village, no grave, because there is no grave to find, and the stories surrounding him do not begin in time so much as they erupt from eternity into the human story at precise, chosen moments. Yogananda himself wrote with characteristic precision and wonder that Babaji's form, appearing ageless and breathtakingly beautiful, has been seen by multiple witnesses across centuries, the master looking no older than a radiant young man, his body untouched by the ravages of time that consume every other living creature on this earth. The great Lahiri Mahasaya, a mild-mannered government accountant living a quiet domestic life in the sacred city of Varanasi, was the first modern soul to be formally initiated into Babaji's ancient science, a system of inner alchemy so powerful it carried a name that would one day circle the globe, Kriya Yoga. It was the year 1861, and Lahiri Mahasaya had just received a routine government transfer to Ranikhet, a posting in the foothills of the Himalayas that seemed, on the surface, entirely ordinary. The kind of bureaucratic reassignment that shuffles a man from one dusty desk to another, yet Babaji had arranged it with the precision of a cosmic architect. There, among those ancient peaks that have witnessed the prayers of 10,000 saints, Lahiri heard a familiar voice calling his name from the mountainside, a voice that reached into a memory far older than this one lifetime, a voice that belonged to a face he would recognize not with his mind, but with his soul. That recognition, that moment of meeting between the deathless master and his destined student, would set into motion a chain of grace so vast and so carefully woven that its final threads would one day reach every continent on earth, and we are only at the very beginning of this story. Lahiri Mahasaya climbed toward the source of that voice with steps that felt guided by something beyond his own will, as though the mountain itself were drawing him upward through pine and mist and thinning air, through the kind of silence that only exists at the edges of the known world. And then he saw him, seated upon a tiger skin, ageless and luminous, a young man whose eyes held the depth of unmeasured centuries, whose smile carried no surprise, as though he had been waiting precisely here, in precisely this moment, since before time had given Lahiri Mahasaya the name he now carried in this life. Babaji spoke first, and what he said shattered the ordinary logic of a lifetime in an instant. He addressed Lahiri not as a stranger arrived by coincidence, but as a beloved disciple returned after a long journey, calling him by a name that resonated in chambers of memory Lahiri had not known were still open within him. Yogananda records in the autobiography that Babaji then touched Lahiri's forehead, and in that single gesture the veil was lifted. A cascade of past life remembrance flooded through Lahiri Mahasaya like a river that had been dammed for decades suddenly finding its course again, rushing, luminous, unstoppable. Lahiri wept, and Babaji received those tears without ceremony, for in the presence of this master there was no performance of devotion, only the clean and overwhelming truth of recognition, two souls whose connection spanned incarnations, meeting again in the high Himalayas as simply and as profoundly as dawn returning to a waiting mountain. Babaji showed Lahiri a golden palace that materialized in the wilderness at his will, a demonstration not of magic for its own sake but of the deeper teaching embedded within it, that matter obeys consciousness, That the world we call solid is nothing more than the crystallized thought of a god who has temporarily forgotten to unthink it. Within that sacred space, Babaji formally initiated Lahiri Mahasaya into Kriya Yoga, the ancient royal science of God realization, a technique so precisely calibrated to the human energy body that Yogananda would later describe it as the equivalent of a single year of natural spiritual evolution compressed into a single session of correct practice. This was not a spontaneous gift born of that Himalayan afternoon alone. Babaji explained to Lahiri that this initiation had been earned across many lifetimes of sincere seeking, that karma is never arbitrary, that every moment of genuine longing for God is recorded and honored in the great cosmic ledger with a faithfulness that makes human bookkeeping look careless by comparison. Babaji then gave Lahiri his mission with words that carried the weight of prophecy. He was to return to the plains, to live as a householder among ordinary men, to demonstrate that liberation is not the exclusive property of forest monks but a flame that can burn clean and bright inside the life of any sincere soul willing to touch it. This was the revolution hidden inside a quiet transfer of grace on a Himalayan mountainside, not a new religion, not a conquest, but a key handed back to humanity, the same key that had been locked away in monastery and cave for centuries, now entrusted to a meek government accountant from Varanasi whose destiny was so large it could not be contained by any temple walls yet built. And so Lahiri Mahasaya descended from those sacred heights carrying something invisible yet heavier than stone, an initiation so ancient it predated the Vedas themselves, a fire kindled at the very source of consciousness, now entrusted to the hands of a man who would ride a government palanquin back to his desk in Varanasi. When he returned to the plains, nothing about him appeared to have changed, the same mild face, the same modest government quarters, the same salary, the same household duties. And yet those with subtle perception who came near him felt immediately that they were standing beside a door that opened onto the infinite. Word travels differently in India than elsewhere in the world, not through newspapers or proclamations but through that invisible current of spiritual longing that connects sincere souls across distances they cannot explain, and one by one, like moths drawn to a flame they had never seen but somehow always remembered, seekers began finding their way to Lahiri's door. He never turned a single worthy soul away. This is perhaps the miracle most often overlooked. He received sages, scholars, the desperate and the curious, householders burdened with grief, and young men burning with questions, all of them finding in his presence a silence so alive it answered them before they could fully form their words. Yogananda records in the Autobiography that among Lahiri's earliest disciples were figures of extraordinary attainment, men and women who had spent lifetimes in sadhana and recognized immediately, upon receiving Kriya initiation, that this was the method they had been circling around without ever quite reaching, the direct technique that burns karma the way fire burns cotton. The Kriya itself, as Babaji had restored it, was not a belief system or a philosophy one could argue about in learned halls. It was a precise physiological and spiritual science, a method of working directly with the breath and the life current, so that what might take ordinary spiritual evolution many thousands of years could be compressed into decades of devoted practice. Lahiri's own life became the proof of the teaching. He never abandoned his family, never wore the orange robe of renunciation, never retreated to a cave, and yet disciples who sat with him in meditation reported experiences of samadhi, of the light behind thought, of a stillness so profound it felt like standing at the very center of creation while the entire universe rotated gently around them. His wife Shrinti Kashi Moni, herself a soul of great patience and devotion, witnessed her husband transformed and yet unchanged. The same man who balanced household accounts also sat in the small hours of the morning in states of God communion so deep that his body became cold to the touch, suspended between this world and the one that contains it. Even the manner of his teaching was revolutionary. He spoke little, prescribed individual practices to individual students based on their inner constitution, and refused to collect followers in the way a merchant collects inventory, understanding with quiet certainty that genuine spiritual transmission is always a conversation between two souls, never a performance for a crowd. And always, beneath everything, beneath the gentle instruction, beneath the householder's duties, beneath the government service and the family life, ran the unbroken awareness of Babaji's presence, that deathless saint who had set this wheel turning, watching from his Himalayan heights as his quiet revolution moved through the world like light moves through water, bending without breaking, illuminating everything it touched. And so the wheel turned, from Lahiri Mahasaya's quiet sitting room in Benares, through the decades, outward into lives that would carry the flame still further, each soul chosen not by accident but by the invisible architecture of divine design. Each link in the chain forged with a precision that no human institution could replicate. Among those drawn into Lahiri Mahasaya's orbit was a man of rare spiritual gravity, Priya Nath Karar, who would come to be known to the world as Sri Yukteswar Giri, a name that would one day be spoken with the same reverence as his masters, and his masters' masters before him. Yukteswar first encountered Lahiri Mahasaya in Benares, and that meeting, like so many encounters in this lineage, was not a casual event but a recognition, as though two parts of a single ancient conversation had finally found each other again after a long and necessary silence. What set Yukteswar apart even among Lahiri's remarkable disciples was a quality of intellectual fearlessness. He possessed the devotion of a saint and the precision of a scientist, and he would spend his life demonstrating that these two faculties, so often placed in opposition, were in truth two eyes meant to see the same reality together. Lahiri Mahasaya, who discerned the inner constitution of every soul who came before him, saw in Yukteswar a particular destiny, not merely to practice and be liberated, but to serve as an instrument of transmission, to prepare a vessel who would in time carry Kriya Yoga beyond the borders of India and into the wider world. This purpose was crystallized in a moment of extraordinary intimacy. At the Kumbh Mela of 1894, in Allahabad, Yukteswar encountered none other than Mahavatar Babaji himself, the deathless master standing quietly among the crowds of pilgrims as though he were simply another wandering sadhu, recognized only by those whose inner sight had been sufficiently sharpened. Babaji addressed Yukteswar directly, with the calm authority of one who moves through time differently than ordinary men. He spoke of a book that Yukteswar was to write, a scripture that would draw the parallels between the teachings of Krishna and the teachings of Christ, demonstrating the underlying unity of Eastern and Western spiritual revelation. That book, The Holy Science, would become one of the quietly astonishing documents of the modern spiritual age, composed not in the language of sentiment but in the precise vocabulary of cosmic law, arguing with careful erudition that beneath the apparent differences of tradition and culture, the great masters of every age had been pointing toward a single, unified truth. Babaji told Yukteswar that Yogananda would come, that a disciple was being prepared, even then, whose mission would be to carry the ancient science of Kriya Yoga westward, to plant those seeds in foreign soil and watch them take root in hearts that had never heard of Benares or the Himalayas or the lineage of deathless saints. And so the architecture of an entire spiritual century was revealed in a brief exchange at a crowded festival, Babaji, ageless and unhurried, speaking the future into Yukteswar's listening heart with the quiet certainty of one who does not predict events but participates in their design, the river of this lineage widening now, preparing to flow beyond any shore it had yet touched. That meeting at the Kumbh Mela was not merely a conversation, it was a commission, a sealing of destiny spoken into being at the most sacred confluence of rivers in all of India, where millions came seeking liberation and one young Swami received an assignment that would reshape the spiritual geography of an entire age. Yukteswar carried that encounter homeward in his bones, understanding now that his role in the lineage was not simply to receive, he had been appointed as the final shaping hand. The master craftsman who would take a raw and yearning soul and polish it into a vessel capable of crossing oceans with the fire of Kriya Yoga held safely inside. Back in his hermitage at Serampore, Sri Yukteswar arranged his life with extraordinary precision, establishing an ashram where the atmosphere itself became a form of teaching, where silence was instructive, where the hours were governed by practice, and where a disciplined love replaced every sentimentality that the spiritual path could not afford to carry. The ashram at Serampore became known to sincere seekers along the Hooghly, a modest building whose spiritual weight far exceeded its physical simplicity. Students would arrive, and Yukteswar would assess them with eyes that seemed to look not at the face a man wore in the world but at the soul he carried beneath it. Among those who came and went and came again, one name was being prepared in a household in Gorakhpur, a boy named Mukunda, born on January 5, 1893. into a deeply devout family whose very atmosphere vibrated with the fragrance of devotion and whose father held a high post in the Bengal-Nagpur railway yet kept his life anchored in the remembrance of God. From his earliest years, Mukunda was marked by an intensity of longing that set him apart. He would later write that even as a small child he was drawn toward samadhi, toward the luminous stillness that lay beneath all ordinary experience, as though some memory from a former life kept pressing through the walls of this one, reminding him that he had traveled this road before. His mother, Gyanaprabha Ghosh, was the first great spiritual influence of his life, a woman of extraordinary inner grace who seemed to move through household duties as though they were themselves a form of worship, and who before her early death placed her young son in the care of something larger than any earthly parent could offer. She had received from a wandering saint a mysterious sealed amulet with instructions that it be passed to Mukunda at the right moment, a small act that shimmered with the fingerprints of Babaji's invisible guidance, for nothing in this lineage was accidental. And what appeared as the gesture of a stranger passing through a courtyard was, in the architecture of the masters, a precisely placed stone in a very long bridge. When his mother died, Mukunda was thrown into a grief that became a furnace of longing. That loss, devastating as it was, became the very force that intensified his search, transforming sorrow into rocket fuel for the soul, driving him toward the Himalayas, toward saints, toward the face of a teacher whose name he did not yet know but whose existence he felt the way one feels the warmth of a fire before rounding the corner and seeing its light. And so the boy who would become Yogananda moved through his early years in a kind of sacred restlessness, writing poetry to the Divine Mother, sitting in meditation in stolen hours, running toward sadhus in the streets of Calcutta, seeking the Guru who had already, in some dimension beyond ordinary time, already accepted him, already sent word ahead through Babaji's own lips at a festival on the banks of the Ganges. There was a man in Serampore, a city of quiet temples and colonial echoes along the Hooghly River, who had already mapped the invisible architecture of the cosmos, a man whose eyes carried the weight of lifetimes, who was waiting, with perfect patience, for a student whose footsteps were still years away from his door. Sri Yukteswar Giri had been shaped by two worlds, the precision of Vedic astronomy and the boundless fire of Kriya Yoga, and in him those two worlds had not merely coexisted but fused into something entirely new, a mind that could dissect a horoscope with mathematical rigor while simultaneously abiding in the silence that precedes all thought. He had received his own initiation from Lahiri Mahasaya in Benares, and in that meeting the ancient technique of Kriya had passed like a torch from hand to hand, not as doctrine, not as ritual, but as a living current of breath and consciousness that reorganized the practitioner from within, cell by cell, until the boundary between the individual and the infinite grew thin as morning mist. Lahiri Mahasaya himself was a figure of breathtaking paradox, a householder, a government accountant who balanced ledgers by day and dissolved the universe by night. A man so ordinary in his external life that his neighbors saw only a quiet Bengali gentleman, and so extraordinary within that the greatest saints of his age made pilgrimages to sit at his feet. He had been summoned to the Himalayas in 1861 in a way that defied every rational category, called there through dreams, through an inexplicable tugging at the chest, through a sequence of postings and transfers that seemed, in retrospect, orchestrated by a hand that does not show itself in the official record of human history. At Raniket, among the forested hills, an unfamiliar young man had called out to him by name, and Lahiri, startled, had followed him up a mountain path to a cave where something impossible had occurred, something that shattered the ordinary story of a man's life as surely as a stone shatters still water, leaving ripples that would eventually reach the shores of every continent on earth. That young man was Babaji, and in that cave, Babaji had spoken to Lahiri with the easy familiarity of a teacher greeting a beloved student after a long journey, reminding him of a past life, restoring memories that had been folded into sleep by the mercy of incarnation, handing back to a soul what was already, eternally, its own. Yogananda records this encounter in the Autobiography with a reverence that never tips into sensationalism. Babaji had not performed the miracle to impress, but to restore, and the distinction matters enormously, because every action of Babaji as reported by those who encountered him carries that same quality, purposeful, precise, moved entirely by compassion rather than display. After his initiation in that Himalayan cave, Lahiri Mahasaya descended back into the world, literally descended the mountain, and returned to his family, his accounting work, his ordinary domestic life, and this return was itself the teaching. The radical demonstration that liberation is not the possession of the cave or the monastery but can be carried like a lamp into the marketplace. For the next several decades, Lahiri Mahasaya sat in his Benares home and received seekers of every caste and background, initiating thousands into Kriya Yoga, breathing life into a technique that Babaji had explicitly described as the fulfillment of a promise to humanity, a scientific method for accelerating the soul's journey home. Preserved through ages and now released again into the world precisely because the world, in its suffering, was ready to receive it. Among those thousands who came to Lahiri Mahasaya's door in Benares was a man whose name would become one of the most revered in all of Indian spiritual history, Priya Nath Karar, who would later be known to the world as Sri Yukteswar, a brilliant, precise, and somewhat formidable soul who arrived at the master's threshold burning with a hunger for truth that no ordinary teaching could satisfy. Sri Yukteswar was not a soft or easily impressed man. He was a householder, a landowner, a man of sharp intellect who had already studied the scriptures deeply, and yet when he sat before Lahiri Mahasaya and received initiation into Kriya Yoga, something within him cracked open like a sealed chamber long waiting for light, and he understood in that moment that he had found what he had been searching for across many lifetimes. What passed between Lahiri Mahasaya and the young Yukteswar was more than instruction, it was a transmission, a recognition between souls whose destinies were already woven together, for Babaji himself, as Yogananda would later reveal, had foreseen this lineage unfolding step by step, each master preparing the vessel who would carry the flame one generation further into the world. Lahiri Mahasaya was a man of miracles. Though he wore his powers with the same quiet modesty he brought to his accounting ledgers, stories of his healings and visions circulated through Benares like whispered prayers, yet he never performed wonders for display, never sought followers with the theater of supernatural achievement, always pointing beyond the miracle to the presence that made all miracles merely ordinary by comparison. One of the most extraordinary accounts recorded in the Autobiography concerns a devoted disciple named Ram Gopal Musumdar, a man so deep in meditation practice that he had begun to experience states of consciousness that most householders could not imagine, and who one night was guided to a riverside encounter with a saint, Babaji's sister, herself a deathless being, whose very form radiated a light that seemed to belong to no country and no century. This encounter was not incidental detail. It carried a message at the heart of Babaji's mission, that the deathless ones are not solitary hermits indifferent to humanity but active, watchful presences, moving quietly through time with a care for the world that most human beings, tangled in the noise of ordinary ambition, cannot begin to perceive or measure. Lahiri Mahasaya's own body became a kind of living argument against the idea that spiritual power requires renunciation of the world. He cooked, he slept, he sat in the courtyard with neighbors. He aged visibly in the eyes of the city while his disciples reported that in deep states of meditation, his face appeared to shine with a light that no oil lamp in that small room could possibly account for. The Kriya Yoga he transmitted was precise and physiological as well as metaphysical, a technique working directly with the breath and the spine, with the life force itself, accelerating the natural evolution of consciousness in a way that Babaji had described to Lahiri with an almost scientific specificity, saying that 1 year of correct Kriya practice accomplishes what would take 1,000,000 years of unaided natural evolution to achieve, a claim that electrified every sincere seeker who heard it. When Lahiri Mahasaya finally departed from his body in 1895, the manner of his passing was itself a final teaching. He spoke to his disciples, withdrew inward, and the room in which he sat was suffused with a fragrance that those present would spend the rest of their lives trying and failing to describe in ordinary language, as though the boundary between the material and the divine had momentarily become too thin to pretend was solid. And yet even in death, Lahiri Mahasaya did not entirely disappear. Multiple disciples reported seeing him after his passing, not in dream but in waking vision, and Sri Yukteswar himself, now carrying the lineage forward, understood these appearances not as hallucination or grief but as confirmation that the master had simply exchanged one form of teaching for another, moving from visible presence to something even less bounded and more free. Sri Yukteswar Giri, born Priya Nath Kaur in 1855 in the holy city of Serampore, was not the kind of man who inspired gentle admiration. He inspired something closer to awe, sharpened by a little fear. The way a great cliff face inspires not comfort but scale, and those who came to sit with him quickly understood that his love, though absolute, would never be the kind that permitted softness where precision was required. He had met Lahiri Mahasaya while still a householder, a young man of intelligence and spiritual hunger, and the meeting had rearranged something fundamental inside him, not gradually, the way most transformations occur, but with the sudden totality of a lamp being lit in a room that had been dark so long the darkness had begun to feel normal. And from that day forward Sri Yukteswar bent every faculty he possessed toward the science his master had entrusted to him. Yogananda would later recall that Sri Yukteswar's ashram at Serampore, a modest building called the Priyadarshini, held within its quiet rooms and inner courtyard a quality of stillness that seemed structural, as though the walls themselves had absorbed years of deep meditation and were now quietly radiating it back, and even new visitors, skeptical and restless when they arrived, often found themselves growing inexplicably calm within minutes of crossing the threshold. The discipline Sri Yukteswar imposed was exacting in a way that confused those who expected a spiritual teacher to deal primarily in consolation. He corrected grammar, demanded punctuality, expected his students to master ancient Sanskrit texts alongside the inner practices of Kriya, and he was known to rebuke a disciple's careless logic with a precision that left no comfortable fog to hide in, because he understood that a mind capable of deceiving itself in small matters would eventually deceive itself in large ones. Yet those same disciples, and Yogananda describes this with unmistakable tenderness, also witnessed another Sri Yukteswar entirely, a man who, in unguarded moments, radiated a warmth so encompassing it felt almost unbearable, who would quietly arrange for a struggling student's practical needs without ever mentioning it, and whose eyes, when he was pleased with a disciple's progress, held something that could only be called the joy of a parent watching a child take its first unaided steps toward the infinite. It was within this lineage, this unbroken river of transmission flowing from Babaji through Lahiri to Sri Yukteswar, that Mukunda Lal Ghosh first arrived as a young man, restless with a spiritual longing so consuming it had made ordinary schooling feel like trying to quench a fire with a thimble of water, and his first meeting with Sri Yukteswar at Serampore in 1910 was, by his own account, less a meeting than a recognition, as though two parts of a long-divided thing had simply found their way back together. Sri Yukteswar looked at the young Mukunda, who would one day be known to the world as Paramahansa Yogananda, and said, with a directness that bypassed every social formality, "I have been waiting for you," and in that sentence, short as a held breath, was compressed something that those who understood the nature of guru and disciple would immediately recognize not as sentiment but as cosmic fact, the acknowledgement of a soul contract predating the current lifetime entirely. The years that followed were not easy ones in the way spiritual seekers sometimes romantically imagine. Yogananda wept under Sri Yukteswar's corrections, felt the sting of his master's refusal to offer praise where precision was lacking, and more than once mistook the severity for coldness before being shown, again and again, that the severity was itself the most intimate form of care, the kind that bets everything on the student's capacity to become more than they currently believe themselves to be. Alongside this personal formation, Sri Yukteswar was also engaged in a remarkable intellectual project, the writing of a small but staggering book called The Holy Science, in which he demonstrated the underlying unity between the ancient Sankhya philosophy of India and the deepest teachings of the Christian scriptures, a work he completed at Babaji's direct request, because the deathless master had foreseen a time when East and West would need a bridge built not from sentiment but from the precise architecture of shared truth. And over all of this, the ashram at Serampore, the corrections and the silences, the slow transformation of a brilliant and restless boy into a vessel capable of carrying an ancient teaching to an entirely new world. The invisible hand of Mahavatar Babaji continued to move, as it always had, neither loudly nor with any need for acknowledgement, like the gravity that holds everything in orbit without ever once announcing itself. And so it was in this carefully prepared soil, the ashram at Serampore, the discipline of Sri Yukteswar, the unseen orchestration of Babaji himself, that the young Mukunda Lal Ghosh began to take the shape destiny had long intended for him. though he himself could not yet see the outline of what he was becoming. Sri Yukteswar was not a teacher who offered comfort as a first resort, he offered precision, and the distinction mattered enormously, because Yogananda would later write that every correction his guru administered was not a wound but a surgery, painful in the moment, miraculous in its long result, each one removing something that would otherwise have blocked the light. There were days at Serampore when the young Mukunda chafed under the weight of his guru's gaze, when the silence between master and disciple felt less like peace and more like examination. And yet even in those moments something deeper in him recognized that he was being held by a love so total it had no need to announce itself with softness. Sri Yukteswar possessed what Yogananda described as an almost preternatural ability to read the inner weather of those around him, to see not what a student presented on the surface but what currents of pride, fear, or attachment still ran beneath. And it was from this seeing that his corrections came, always precisely aimed, never wasted. On one occasion, described with quiet humor in the Autobiography, Mukunda attempted a small deception, a trivial social untruth, and Sri Yukteswar's response was not anger but something more unsettling, a calm, complete, and total awareness, as though the master had been watching the thought form before the words even left the boy's mouth. It was this quality of omniscience, worn lightly, never wielded as power, that most deeply convinced Yogananda that his guru was no ordinary man, that behind the formal robes and the disciplined routines of Serampore ashram there lived a consciousness that touched dimensions of reality the waking mind can scarcely imagine. Babaji's presence, though physically absent from these daily scenes, was woven into the very purpose of Yogananda's training, for it was Babaji who had foreseen that a messenger would be needed, someone formed in India's oldest wisdom but capable of speaking to the Western heart, and Sri Yukteswar was knowingly fashioning exactly that instrument, year by patient year. The Kriya Yoga that Sri Yukteswar transmitted had passed in an unbroken line from Babaji to Lahiri Mahasaya to Sri Yukteswar himself, and it carried within it not merely a technique but a living force, a subtle transmission that Yogananda would later describe as capable of telescoping the spiritual evolution of entire lifetimes into a single dedicated practice. What was being built at Serampore, in other words, was not simply a well-educated monk or a capable teacher of philosophy, but something the world had rarely seen, a bridge builder of the most unlikely kind, a man who would carry the Himalayan silence into the lecture halls of America and find, to everyone's astonishment, that it fit. And through every stage of this formation, the long evenings of instruction, the tests, the silences, the gradual deepening of Mukunda into Yogananda, Mahavatar Babaji remained what he had always been, the first cause behind a chain of causes, the initiator of a mission that now moved through human hands but had never, not for a single moment, left his care. And so the time came, as Babaji had foreseen, as Sri Yukteswar had prepared for, and as the young Yogananda had quietly dreamed of, when the student who had sat at the feet of a lion in Serampore would be asked to carry that lion's roar across an ocean to an entirely new world. In 1920, Paramahansa Yogananda received what he described as a direct divine call, a voice that spoke in the interior silence, confirming what his guru had long told him, that America was waiting, that the West had a hunger it did not yet have words for, and that he was the one appointed to feed it. Sri Yukteswar, who had spent years fashioning his disciple with the precision of a master jeweler, gave his blessing with characteristic economy, not with tears or ceremony, but with a calm that itself communicated something immeasurable, the unspoken assurance that separation in the body changes nothing in the spirit. Yogananda sailed to Boston as a delegate to the International Congress of Religious Liberals, and when he stepped onto American soil for the first time, he carried with him not luggage alone but an unbroken thread, gossamer thin yet indestructible, that stretched back through Sri Yukteswar, through Lahiri Mahasaya, through the ageless figure in the Himalayas who had set all of this in motion centuries before. His first lecture in Boston was, by his own account, terrifying in its openness, a young Indian monk standing before a Western audience, offering not theology but experience, not doctrine but the living breath of Kriya Yoga, a science of the soul that asked nothing of its listener except the willingness to go inward. What astonished those early American audiences was not the philosophy, sophisticated as it was, but the quality of the man himself, that stillness behind the eyes, that warmth that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than personality. As if the peace he described was not a teaching he had memorized but a country he actually inhabited. For the next several years Yogananda crossed America repeatedly, speaking in cities and town halls and churches, drawing crowds that had never heard Sanskrit, never sat in meditation, never imagined that an ancient Indian science might answer the particular loneliness of the modern Western heart, and yet finding, again and again, that it did. He established the Self-Realization Fellowship in Los Angeles, planting it like a seed in California's sun-drenched soil, building a center that would become the institutional home of Kriya Yoga in the West, a place where Babaji's ancient gift, transmitted through the lineage, could be received by anyone willing to receive it. Through all of this expansion, all this travel and teaching and institution building, Yogananda never forgot the source. He wrote and spoke of Babaji with the reverence of a man describing not a historical figure but a living presence, one he felt behind every moment of inspired speech, every unexpected door that opened, every student whose life quietly turned toward light. For this is the final mystery that the whole lineage reveals, that Babaji's mission was never about one man or one age or one tradition, but about something planted in the very heart of human longing, a fire that travels through chosen hands across centuries, burning now as it burned then, patient and imperishable, awaiting only the moment when a sincere soul turns toward it and asks to be lit. And so we arrive at a question that has quietly waited beneath every story we have told, not who was Babaji, but what does it mean that he still is, that the present tense is the only tense that truly fits him. That saints across centuries spoke of him not as a memory but as a breathing, intervening force in the affairs of the living. Lahiri Mahasaya, that most human of masters, a government accountant, a householder, a man who rode mules through mountain passes, once told a skeptical disciple that Babaji's body, if one may call it that, casts no shadow and leaves no footprint, not because it is ghostly, but because it has so perfectly reconciled itself with light that the ordinary physics of matter no longer fully apply to it. Yogananda himself recorded the testimony of his own guru, Sri Yukteswar, who described Babaji as belonging to no single religious tradition, no single nation, no single century, a being who had, in Yukteswar's careful phrasing, long ago completed the outward journey of spiritual evolution and now remained only as an act of infinite compassion, a lighthouse that does not need the sea but stays lit for every ship that might. Consider the precise and startling detail Yogananda preserves in the Autobiography, that Babaji appeared to Lahiri Mahasaya in Raniket in 1861, yet disciples who encountered him decades later described the same ageless face, the same luminous copper complexion, the same eyes that seemed to hold inside them a stillness older than the Himalayas that surrounded him. There is a moment in the Autobiography that strikes every careful reader with particular force, the account of Babaji's sister Mataji, herself a realized saint, who lives in perpetual nearness to him, her own body suspended in that same deathless state. The two of them an image so tender it shatters the cold abstraction we sometimes build around the idea of liberation, reminding us that love, not distance from the world, is the final fruit of the path. Yogananda writes that Babaji occasionally appears to advanced Kriya yogis at the moment of their deepest need, not always visibly, but as an inexplicable certainty, a warmth that enters the chest during meditation, a sudden dissolving of fear that cannot be credited to any ordinary cause, and which the yogi afterward can only describe as a visitation, a hand briefly placed upon the shoulder of the soul. Sri Yukteswar told Yogananda that Babaji confers Kriya initiation himself on certain souls who approach him with sufficient readiness, that in some cases the formal lineage of human guru to human disciple is bypassed entirely, and the ancient rite passes directly from that deathless hand into the prepared heart, leaving no record a historian could cite, only a transformation that the recipient carries silently for the rest of their life. What Yogananda understood, and what the entire architecture of the lineage reveals, is that Kriya Yoga is not merely a technique, it is a transmission, a living current that carries within it the consciousness of every master who has ever passed it on. So that when a sincere practitioner sits in the early morning silence and follows the breath through its ancient circuit, they are in some real and not merely poetic sense sitting inside a chain of awakened attention that reaches back to Babaji himself, unbroken, uncooled. The autobiography closes not with an ending but with an opening. Yogananda's final pages carry the quiet confidence of a man who knows the work continues beyond his own body, that the flame he received from Yukteswar, who received it from Lahiri, who received it from Babaji, is not his alone to tend, that it has by now passed into thousands of hands across every continent, burning in languages Lahiri Mahasaya never heard, in cities that did not exist when Babaji first whispered the ancient syllables into the mountain air. And this, finally, is the secret that the whole story of Mahavatar Babaji has been trying to tell us, that the deathless saint is deathless not merely in his own person but in his purpose, that every time a human being in the darkness of their ordinary life feels an inexplicable pull toward silence, toward depth, toward something they cannot name but cannot stop reaching for, that pull has a source, ancient and patient and personal, and its name, known or unknown to the one who feels it, is the same name that has moved through this entire lineage like a river moving through different landscapes, carving toward the sea. And so we arrive at what may be the most quietly astonishing truth embedded in this entire lineage, that the transmission of Kriya Yoga was never meant to remain within the borders of India, never meant to be the private inheritance of sannyasis and forest-dwelling renunciants, but was always, from the very beginning, a gift addressed to the modern world, to the age of machines and noise and spiritual hunger dressed in secular clothing. Yogananda's voyage to America in 1920 was not an accident of biography, it was a mission handed down through every link of the chain, each master passing the torch with the full understanding that the flame must eventually cross oceans, that the ancient science must speak in new tongues to souls who had never heard the word guru and yet were starving for exactly what that word represents. When Yogananda stepped off the ship in Boston Harbor, he carried in his chest the full weight of the Himalayas as Babaji's whispered commission to Lahiri, Lahiri's patient teachings in the pre-dawn lamplight of Varanasi, Yukteswar's rigorous and loving correction across decades, all of it compressed into one young monk standing on a western dock, blinking into a wind that smelled of salt and the entirely unknown. The Self-Realization Fellowship that Yogananda founded in Los Angeles became something the world had never quite seen before, a living institution built not on dogma or exclusivity but on the direct experiential practice of Kriya, open to householders and professionals, to scientists and artists, to anyone willing to sit still long enough to discover that the kingdom the great traditions all promised was not elsewhere but here, inside, accessible through breath and spine and unwavering attention. And the masters who had sent him knew this would happen, Yukteswar had told him plainly, with that characteristic blend of tenderness and precision, that his mission in the West would bear fruit beyond what he could measure in a single lifetime. That seeds planted in America would take root in soil still untilled, would flower in generations not yet born when the two of them sat together in the ashram at Serampore. There is a moment Yogananda describes that stops the breath, the moment when Babaji himself appears briefly at a Kumbh Mela gathering and is recognized by Lahiri, and the two exchange a glance of such ancient familiarity that every bystander falls silent without knowing why, as if the air itself had thickened with a recognition older than any of the bodies present, older perhaps than the festival itself. This is the texture of the lineage that Yogananda was transmitting, not a set of intellectual propositions about the nature of God but a living encounter, a direct meeting between the finite and the infinite that could happen to anyone, anywhere, in a Himalayan cave or a California living room, because the infinite is not bound by geography any more than Babaji is bound by death. The Kriya technique itself, which Yogananda described as an airplane route to God compared to the bullock cart speed of ordinary spiritual effort, is ultimately the physical expression of Babaji's compassion. The great saint's understanding that human beings in this age do not have centuries to spend in forest austerities, that they need a method that works within the conditions of actual human life, within families and occupations and the honest complexity of being alive. Lahiri Mahasaya demonstrated this with his own life, never retreating from the world, always returning home to his wife and his ledger books and his government position, proving by lived example that the deepest liberation is not incompatible with the deepest engagement, that the yogi who has stilled the inner storm can stand in the marketplace without being moved. And this is how the story of Mahavatar Babaji continues to move, not through dramatic apparitions on mountain peaks, though those too remain possible, but through the unremarkable moments when an ordinary person in an ordinary life pauses, breathes, turns inward, and finds that the silence waiting for them there is not empty but full, impossibly full, charged with a presence that has been waiting without impatience since before they were born, the deathless saint standing at the center of every sincere seeking, patient as the mountains, old as the light. And so we arrive at the thread that connects all of this, the living transmission, the unbroken chain of awakened souls through which Babaji's fire has been passed hand to hand across centuries like a torch that never gutters, each master receiving the flame and giving it forward, not diminished but somehow brighter for the giving. Lahiri Mahasaya received Kriya Yoga in that Himalayan cave in 1861, and the weight of what he carried back down to Varanasi was immeasurable, not a philosophy, not a doctrine, but a precise technology of consciousness, something that could be practiced in the dark before dawn while the city still slept, something that worked. Among the thousands who came to sit at Lahiri Mahasaya's feet was a young man of extraordinary spiritual hunger named Priya Nath Karar, who would come to be known to the world as Sri Yukteswar Giri, and from the first moment he encountered his guru, something in him recognized what he had been searching for across many lifetimes. Sri Yukteswar was not a soft man. He was precise, demanding, almost fierce in his standards, and Yogananda would later describe him as a stern disciplinarian whose rebukes could sting like a slap but whose love underneath was oceanic, a love that did not flatter but forged, burning away impurities the way a jeweler burns away dross to reveal the gold beneath. It was Lahiri Mahasaya himself who set Sri Yukteswar forward with a specific mission, to write a book reconciling the ancient scriptures of India with the New Testament of the West, demonstrating that beneath the surface differences of language and symbol, the same eternal truth breathed through both traditions, that Christ and Krishna were drawing from the same inexhaustible well. That book, The Holy Science, was completed by Sri Yukteswar in 1894, the same year he encountered Babaji himself at the great Kumbh Mela in Allahabad, a meeting Yogananda recounts with hushed reverence, Babaji appearing in the vast pilgrim crowd and speaking directly to Sri Yukteswar, confirming that his work was already known in those higher planes where such things are watched and guided. Babaji told Sri Yukteswar that a disciple would come to him, a disciple who would carry Kriya Yoga to the West, who would build the bridge between East and West that the age demanded, and Sri Yukteswar waited, trusting that prophecy, shaping himself and his ashram in Serampore into the forge that would prepare the disciple for the magnitude of the work ahead. That disciple arrived in 1910, a restless, brilliant, intensely devotional young Bengali named Mukunda Lal Ghosh, who would spend years under Sri Yukteswar's sometimes bewildering, always purposeful training before taking the monastic name by which the world would know him, Paramahansa Yogananda, the swan of bliss, the one who swims in the ocean of God. What Yogananda received from Sri Yukteswar was not merely technique but transmission, the direct current of Babaji's original initiation flowing through Lahiri Mahasaya, through Sri Yukteswar, into him, each link in the chain a complete master, each one having burned away the personal self sufficiently that what flowed through them was not distorted but pure, arriving in Yogananda with its full voltage intact. And this is the miracle that Babaji engineered across generations, not a lineage of belief, not an inheritance of ideas, but an uninterrupted river of living realization, each master a new channel carved by grace through which the same deathless water flows, the same water that first sprang from that ageless source in the Himalayas, clear and cold and inexhaustible, finding its way now into every corner of the world where a sincere soul cups their hands and leans down to drink. And so the river reached the shores of the West, not by accident, not by the ambitions of a young monk seeking fame, but by the precise design of a deathless master who had watched the turning of centuries and knew that the hour had come for Kriya Yoga to breathe in a new hemisphere. Yogananda arrived in Boston in 1920, stepping off the ship into a world of automobiles and newspapers and electric light, a world that had never heard the word Kriya, a world that measured reality only by what the senses could confirm, and yet, beneath all that noise, he could feel the same hunger he had known in Serampore, the same ache for something the material world could not name. He carried with him not luggage but legacy, the precise initiatic knowledge that Babaji had handed to Lahiri Mahasaya in that fire-lit Himalayan encampment, the same science that Lahiri had pressed like a seal into Sri Yukteswar's being, the same living fire that Sri Yukteswar had transmitted in that small Serampore ashram, now burning quietly inside a 30-year-old Bengali monk standing on American soil. He lectured first in small halls, to audiences that came curious and left shaken, not because Yogananda performed displays of power, but because something in the quality of his stillness, his absolute conviction, his eyes that seemed to look through you rather than at you, touched a place in people they had forgotten they possessed. Babaji had told Lahiri Mahasaya decades before that the ancient science would spread to all nations, and now each city Yogananda entered, Boston, Chicago, Denver, Los Angeles, became another verse of that prophecy being written in real time. The Himalayan silence arriving in lecture halls lit by fluorescent light and filled with the sound of the 20th century's restless searching. In Los Angeles he established the Self-Realization Fellowship, a name chosen with surgical precision, not self-glorification, not self-escape, but self-realization, the very goal that Babaji had encoded into Kriya Yoga from the beginning. The direct knowing of the self as identical with the infinite, no priest required, no intermediary but one's own breath and spine and the grace of the lineage flowing quietly beneath. Students came to him from every walk of American life, scientists and socialites, actors and engineers, people who had tried everything the modern world offered and found it lacked a final dimension. And what Yogananda offered them was not a belief system to adopt but a technology to practice, Babaji's ancient tool placed directly into 21st century hands still warm from the morning newspaper. He wrote unceasingly, giving form to what is almost impossible to put into form, the inner architecture of Samadhi, the geography of the chakras, the mechanics of Kriya breath that Babaji had distilled from the oldest scriptures. And his words carried that same quality his presence did, a clarity that seemed to arrive from beyond the author, as though Babaji himself were guiding the pen through a willing hand. Sri Yukteswar appeared to Yogananda in a luminous vision after his Mahasamadhi in 1936, describing in breathtaking detail the astral and causal worlds, confirming that consciousness does not end at the body's dissolution but continues its education across subtler planes, a revelation that Yogananda recorded faithfully, adding yet another layer to what Babaji's lineage had always quietly asserted, that death is a corridor, not a conclusion. And through all of it, the lecture tours, the writings, the initiations given to thousands, what remained constant was the invisible thread running back through Sri Yukteswar, back through Lahiri Mahasaya, back into the Himalayas where an ageless master still walks among the peaks, the source that has never diminished, the light that has never once flickered, the saint who set all of this in motion and watches still, from beyond time, as his river finds new souls to carry it forward into the world. And so we arrive at a question that has quietly haunted every chapter of this story, not who Babaji is, but what he is, in the deepest possible sense, beyond name, beyond form, beyond the comfortable boundaries of any single tradition. Yogananda himself wrote with careful deliberateness that Babaji's body casts no shadow, that it does not age, that it requires none of the biological maintenance that anchors every other human life to the slow machinery of time, and that these are not metaphors, but literal observed facts reported by credible witnesses across centuries. The great Lahiri Mahasaya, a man of impeccable precision who kept meticulous records of his own spiritual states, never once embellished his accounts of Babaji, and it is precisely that sobriety, that almost bureaucratic honesty, that makes the miraculous details he recorded so utterly impossible to dismiss. Sri Yukteswar, who by temperament was the most rigorous intellect in the entire lineage, a man who wrote a precise astronomical text reconciling Hindu and Christian scriptures, accepted Babaji as the living axis of a cosmic dispensation, and a mind like Yukteswar's does not accept anything without having examined it from every possible angle. What emerges from the combined testimony of these three masters, Lahiri, Yukteswar, Yogananda, is not a mythology assembled after the fact, but something closer to a convergent scientific report, three independent instruments all pointing toward the same unmeasurable, undeniable source. Babaji has never announced himself to history the way prophets and conquerors do. There are no empires built in his name, no temples commissioned, no armies raised, and yet his influence has moved through the last 2 centuries like a deep river current, invisible at the surface but shaping everything it touches. Yogananda wrote that Babaji works in the background of world events, communicating through chosen instruments, nudging the direction of civilizations not through force but through the quiet ignition of individual souls, and that the revival of Kriya Yoga itself was his deliberate response to the spiritual hunger of a mechanized, materially dazzled modern age. Every initiation into Kriya Yoga that has ever been given, in a candlelit ashram in Ranchi, in a borrowed hall in Boston, in a garden in Los Angeles, carries within it an unbroken energetic transmission that traces its living root back to that moonlit night in Raniket when Babaji breathed the technique back into the world through Lahiri Mahasaya's willing and trembling hands. This is the deeper miracle that Yogananda wanted his readers to feel, not the palace materializing from air, not the body restored to life on the funeral pyre, but the fact that something as delicate and interior as a method of divine communion has survived intact, passed soul to soul, across lifetimes, without a single break in the chain. And even now, as these words move through the air and reach whatever corner of the world you are sitting in at this very moment, that chain has not broken, Babaji still watches, the lineage still breathes, and the Kriya fire that was lit in the eternal snows is still burning, still spreading, still finding the hearts that were always meant to carry it forward. And so we arrive now at a question that has haunted seekers across centuries, not merely who is Babaji, but what is Babaji, and what does his continued existence mean for the rest of us who still live tethered to time, to aging, to the relentless forward march of the body toward its dissolution. Yogananda himself was careful never to reduce Babaji to a curiosity or a legend. He always spoke of him with the quiet certainty of a man describing someone he knew to be real, present, and actively at work in the world, as close as breath, as available as silence. One of the most remarkable things Yogananda reveals is that Babaji does not confine his attention to India, to caves, to disciples draped in saffron. He has appeared across cultures, across traditions, quietly tending to souls whose names history may never record, drawn not by geography but by sincerity. There is a passage in the Autobiography where Yogananda describes Babaji's relationship to Jesus Christ, not as a poetic flourish or interfaith diplomacy, but as a literal, living spiritual collaboration, two masters working across the East and West, coordinating the inner evolution of humanity with a care that makes all our geopolitical borders seem like lines drawn in sand at low tide. This is a staggering idea, that the great traditions are not competing systems but complementary instruments in a single vast symphony, and that Babaji stands somewhere near the conductor's podium, aware of all the parts, guiding the whole toward a resolution we are perhaps only beginning to hear. Lahiri Mahasaya, the great householder saint who carried Kriya out of the Himalayas and into the lanes of Varanasi, once said that Babaji visits him in meditation as reliably as the sun visits the morning, not occasionally, not when summoned, but as a natural and inevitable presence, the way light fills a room the moment the curtain is drawn. What strikes the careful reader of Yogananda's account is how thoroughly Babaji defies the romantic image of the withdrawn mystic. He is not absent from the world but saturated in it, not indifferent to suffering but supremely attentive to it, moving through history the way water moves through rock, finding every crack, wearing every obstacle smooth with patient, invisible persistence. Sri Yukteswar, who was himself a man of such disciplined intellect that he wrote a precise cosmological treatise reconciling Hindu and Christian scripture, spoke of Babaji with a kind of reverent awe that he reserved for almost nothing else. And when a man of that caliber bows inwardly before something, it is worth pausing to understand what he saw. And what he saw, what Lahiri saw, what Yogananda saw, and what countless unnamed souls across the centuries have seen, is not a legend frozen in the amber of ancient text. It is a living flame, responsive, personal, intimate, capable of appearing in a Himalayan forest at midnight or in the silence of a meditation room on the other side of the planet. We do not know what the next encounter will look like, where it will happen, or who will be changed by it, but Yogananda was quietly certain that such encounters are still occurring. That the master who materialized a palace from light and restored a body from ash has not grown tired, has not withdrawn, has not decided that this particular age is too dark or too distracted to deserve his attention. And so we arrive at a question that has no simple answer, one that Yogananda himself turned over with the care of a man handling something both weightless and immeasurably heavy. If Babaji is still present, still watching, still guiding, then what exactly is the nature of his work in this age, in this particular turning of the great cosmic wheel? Yogananda offered a clue in the very framing of Kriya Yoga itself. He did not present it as a relic of some vanished golden era, but as a precision instrument calibrated for the modern mind. A science of breath and consciousness designed to meet the restless, overstimulated, doubt-prone intellect of the 20th century and beyond, because Babaji understood that the seeker of this age would not surrender to mystery on faith alone, but might surrender to it through direct experience. The transmission of Kriya did not happen casually. Babaji gave it first to Lahiri Mahasaya in that high Himalayan camp, not as a gift to one man, but as a seed dropped deliberately into the soil of history, entrusted to a householder rather than a forest ascetic because the message was unmistakable. This path is not reserved for those who have abandoned the world, it belongs equally to the clerk, the merchant, the mother, the grieving, the ambitious, the ordinary. Lahiri carried it back to Varanasi and sat in his small room and taught, quietly, without announcement, without miracles performed for spectacle. Disciples came to him in the early morning hours before the city woke, sitting in the lamplight while the Ganges moved beyond the walls, and something passed between teacher and student that no official record could fully capture. Something that had its origin not in Lahiri's own attainment but in the invisible presence of the one who had commissioned him. Sri Yukteswar received it from Lahiri and refined it further, not altering the essence but sharpening the vessel, building an ashram at Serampore that functioned less like a religious institution and more like a laboratory of the self, a place where Yogananda and a handful of other young men were subjected to a training so precise, so loving, and so occasionally bewildering that years later they still could not always distinguish between the moment they were being tested and the moment they were being embraced. It was Sri Yukteswar who first told Yogananda that Babaji had already foreseen the journey to the West, that the transmission of Kriya to America and Europe was not Yogananda's personal ambition but a commission that had been planned long before Yogananda himself was born, and this single revelation, offered plainly and without drama in the ashram at Serampore, reframed everything, turning Yogananda's life not into a story of individual spiritual seeking but into a chapter of something far older and far larger. Yogananda sailed for America in 1920 carrying that knowledge like a quiet fire in his chest. He arrived in Boston. He walked into a world of automobiles and electric lights and newspapers that had no vocabulary for what he was about to offer. And yet Babaji had said it would work, and so Yogananda stood before his first Western audiences with a certainty that was not arrogance but consecration, the steadiness of a man who knows he has not chosen his mission but been chosen by it. Across the decades of his American work, in lecture halls and temples from Boston to Los Angeles, in personal meetings that sometimes lasted only minutes but left the recipient altered for life, the invisible thread back to Babaji held. Yogananda never presented himself as the origin of anything, always pointing upstream, always naming the lineage, always insisting that what the student was receiving had passed through Yukteswar, through Lahiri, through the deathless hands of the one who sat still in the Himalayas while history moved around him like weather. There is a particular quality to how Yogananda wrote about Babaji in the Autobiography, not with the distance of a biographer documenting someone else's encounters, but with the tenderness of a man writing about someone he personally loved, someone whose presence he had felt even in moments when no physical manifestation occurred, a love that was not sentiment but recognition, the recognition of the soul for its source. And that love, passed from master to disciple, from Babaji to Lahiri to Yukteswar to Yogananda and then outward into the world through every copy of the Autobiography ever opened, every initiation into Kriya ever given, every moment of stillness in which a practitioner felt something shift inexplicably in the region of the heart, that love is perhaps the most accurate description of what Babaji actually is, not a body preserved by some arcane yogic art, but a quality of divine attention that has chosen, for reasons the human mind cannot fully compass, to remain. And so we arrive at a question that the Autobiography itself never fully answers, and perhaps never intends to, not because Yogananda was withholding, but because some questions are not doors that open onto rooms, but doors that open onto sky, and the only honest response to sky is to stand in it. What does it mean for a being to remain? Not to linger, not to haunt, but to remain, with full consciousness, full intention, full love, at the threshold between the manifest world and whatever lies behind it, choosing, again and again across centuries, to stay within reach of those who need reaching? Yogananda offers us one frame for understanding this, drawn from the deepest wells of Vedantic philosophy, the idea that an avatar, a divine incarnation, does not descend into matter the way an ordinary soul does, pulled downward by the gravity of karma, but enters it voluntarily, the way a swimmer dives into water knowing they can surface, and Babaji, by this understanding, has never truly submerged. The ordinary cycle of birth and death operates through a mechanism of forgetting. The soul enters a new body and loses, at least partially, the memory of what it was before. And it is this forgetting that drives the long schooling of incarnation after incarnation. But Babaji has not forgotten, has never forgotten, and so for him there is no cycle, only a sustained and luminous presence. Lahiri Mahasaya, when he was first brought into Babaji's cave encampment in the Himalayas and shown the golden palace that had been materialized there in his honor, was told by the master that this palace had once been his, that he had meditated within these very walls in a previous life, and the recognition that flooded him in that moment, the tears, the prostration, the rush of remembered love. That was not metaphor but the literal unlocking of a soul's deeper memory by a master who had been waiting, patiently, across the interval of a lifetime, for the disciple to return. There is something in that image, Babaji waiting, not with the anxious waiting of one who fears the beloved will not come, but with the absolute certainty of one who knows the reunion is written into the nature of things. That speaks to something most of us have felt in our own lives, that strange sense that certain meetings were not accidents, that certain teachers arrived exactly when they were needed, as if summoned by a part of ourselves that knew how to ask even when the surface mind did not. Sri Yukteswar, who was himself no stranger to austerity or inner experience, described his single documented encounter with Babaji at the Allahabad Kumbh Mela with a quality of stunned reverence that stands out even within the autobiography's many accounts of extraordinary events. Here was a man who had spent decades in rigorous sadhana, who had himself attained states that would have been considered miraculous by any ordinary measure, and yet in Babaji's presence he felt the full weight of his own smallness, not as humiliation but as the natural response of a candle flame acknowledging the sun. It was at that Kumbh Mela encounter that Babaji gave Yukteswar his commission, to write a book reconciling the essential unity of Christian and Hindu scriptures, what would become the Kaivalya Darshanam, or the Holy Science. And in that act Babaji was doing something that only someone with a very long view of history could do, planting a seed in 1894 knowing exactly what tree it would become and whose shade it would eventually provide. Yogananda himself would later carry that book, that tree's first fruit, to the West as one of his foundational teachings, and so the line of transmission reveals itself not as a simple chain passing one thing from hand to hand but as a living architecture, each master contributing a specific gift that the next would need, Lahiri receiving Kriya, Yukteswar receiving the cosmic framework, Yogananda receiving the mandate to carry both into the modern world, and Babaji, behind all of it, the unseen architect who had measured the distances and placed every stone. And here, in part 18 of our journey, we must pause and simply hold what we have built together, not to resolve it, not to explain it away, but to feel the full strange weight of it, this claim that one man, or one being wearing the appearance of a man, has threaded himself through 2,000 years of human history, touching the precise pressure points where consciousness was ready to expand, and that this work is not finished, that somewhere in the high silences of the Himalayas, or perhaps in the silence between your own breaths as you listen to these words, that attention is still turned, still present, still recognizing you. And so we arrive at part 19 carrying everything the previous chapters have given us, not as observers watching a story from a safe distance, but as participants who have been slowly drawn into its gravity, feeling the pull of something that does not yield to ordinary explanation, something that asks more of us than intellectual agreement. Consider what it means that Yogananda did not simply write about Babaji, he wrote from within a living relationship, describing exchanges, transmissions, presences that had not dimmed with time. And this is what separates the autobiography of a yogi from every other spiritual biography ever written, that its author was not reconstructing history but reporting ongoing contact. When Yogananda received Kriya initiation from his master Sri Yukteswar in the quiet of Serampore, he was not receiving a technique invented by a 19th-century Bengali householder. He was receiving something Babaji had deliberately preserved through centuries and then deliberately returned to the world through Lahiri Mahasaya in 1861, a custodianship spanning lifetimes. Lahiri Mahasaya himself, that extraordinary figure, government accountant by day and cosmic initiate by night, would go on to initiate thousands without ever leaving his household life. And Yogananda describes him receiving visitors of every caste and creed, priests and peasants, scholars and simpletons, none turned away, because Babaji's instruction had been that Kriya must now flow freely, without the old restrictions of secrecy. Among those Lahiri Mahasaya initiated was a young man named Priya Nath Kaur, who would later become Sri Yukteswar Giri, and the precision of this transmission chain becomes almost unbearable to contemplate when you realize that Yukteswar's particular gift, his fierce, surgical intellect, his capacity to harmonize Eastern and Western scripture, was precisely what would be needed to prepare the emissary who would carry Kriya to the Western world. Sri Yukteswar received from Babaji, through Lahiri, not only Kriya but also a specific commission, to write the book that would demonstrate the underlying unity of the Christian and Hindu scriptures, and Yogananda records Babaji himself appearing to Yukteswar at the Kumbh Mela in Allahabad and speaking this mission aloud, this extraordinary moment when the deathless one stands in a crowd of pilgrims and quietly changes the course of two traditions. That book, The Holy Science, remains one of the most remarkable documents in modern spiritual literature, a slim, dense, quietly devastating text in which Yukteswar traces with mathematical patience the parallels between the Book of Revelation and the Samkhya philosophy, proving not through sentiment but through structural analysis that consciousness speaks the same language across all its authentic expressions, and Babaji had seen it would need to exist before Yogananda's mission could take root in Western soil. Yogananda's own meeting with Babaji, described with trembling reverence in the Autobiography, was not accidental. It was a recognition, a formal acknowledgement from the source that the student Yukteswar had shaped was now ready. And when Babaji placed his hand on the young Yogananda's shoulder at that Kumbh Mela gathering and said, "You are the one I have chosen," those words carried the weight not of a single moment but of a design assembled across centuries. The Kriya that Yogananda then carried westward on the steamship to America in 1920 was not a relic, it was alive. It was the same fire Babaji had ignited in Lahiri's cave in the Himalayas, transmitted through 3 human vessels without losing a single degree of its original heat. And the thousands of Western students who sat in self-realization fellowship temples across California and beyond were receiving something whose lineage stretched back beyond what any of them could have imagined. And what the lineage reveals in its totality is not a philosophy but a demonstration, a living proof offered across centuries that consciousness is not bound by time. That a being who has dissolved the illusion of death does not recede into abstraction but remains functionally present, initiating, commissioning, appearing when needed, and that the ancient promise embedded in every genuine spiritual tradition, that the seeker who reaches sincerely will be reached in return, is not metaphor but the most literal and verifiable fact in the universe. And yet the demonstration does not end with Yogananda's arrival in the West, because the lineage was never a closed circuit, it was a living river that continued to move, continued to find new channels. And the question that now opens before us is not merely what Babaji did in the past but what his presence continues to do in the present, operating through a network of awakened souls who carry the flame without ever possessing it as their own. Yogananda himself, even as he lectured in Boston and Los Angeles and Chicago, never lost contact with that originating source. He described moments in his American years when Babaji's presence was felt as unmistakably as it had been on the banks of the Ganges, confirming that the ocean of miles between the Himalayas and California was, from the perspective of that deathless consciousness, no distance at all. Sri Yukteswar, still residing in his hermitage at Serampore while his most beloved disciple built temples in a foreign land, held the eastern anchor of that transmission with a discipline that never softened. He continued to teach, to correct, to initiate students, and to maintain through his own rigorous being the unbroken standard of realization that the lineage demanded of every link in its chain. The hermitage at Puri, where Yukteswar spent increasing portions of his later years, became its own quiet axis of spiritual gravity. Students arrived from Bengal and beyond, sat in that salt-aired courtyard overlooking the Bay of Bengal, and received from the aging master a teaching whose precision had not dimmed by a single point, because the fire of Babaji's original transmission burned through him as steadily as it had on the day of his own initiation decades before. In 1936, Yogananda returned to India after 16 years in the West, and the reunion with Sri Yukteswar at Puri was described in the Autobiography with a tenderness that pierces the reader even now. The master who had once seemed made entirely of granite revealed, in those final meetings, a depth of love that his lifelong austerity had not hidden but merely held in trust for the moment when it could be most fully felt. Then came the event that stands among the most staggering passages in all of spiritual literature. Sri Yukteswar passed from his body in 1936, and weeks later appeared to Yogananda in a Bombay hotel room in a form that was not ghostly or translucent but solid, luminous, and completely present, explaining with characteristic precision the nature of the subtle astral and causal worlds that the soul traverses after physical death. That resurrection vision was not a grief-stricken disciple's consolation dream. Yogananda recorded it with the same methodical care he brought to every verifiable event in his life. And what Yukteswar communicated in that Bombay room about the architecture of consciousness beyond the body bore the unmistakable signature of a mind that had never once spoken carelessly. A mind that had been trained and then surpassed every ordinary threshold of knowing. What the resurrection appearance of Yukteswar confirmed, in the most shattering possible way, was the very principle that Babaji's own deathless existence had always embodied. That the realized master does not disappear into silence but continues to function as a conscious agent of liberation, moving between planes with the same purposeful freedom that Babaji had demonstrated for centuries in the high Himalayan silence. The lineage thus revealed itself not as a historical sequence that terminates with Yogananda's death in 1952, but as a structure of consciousness that propagates forward through every initiated Kriyaban who carries the technique faithfully, every soul who sits in genuine meditation and feels that current of ancient intelligence moving through the spine like a river that has been flowing since before recorded time. And Babaji, the fountainhead, the one who does not age, who appears where he is needed, who initiated Lahiri in that cave and set the entire cascade in motion, remains at the center of this living structure not as a symbol to be venerated from a safe devotional distance, but as a presence whose reality the lineage has staked its entire credibility upon. A presence that challenges every seeking soul with the most electrifying of all possible propositions, that liberation is not a metaphor, that the deathless is not a concept, and that the teacher who first whispered Kriya into a startled pilgrim's ear on a Himalayan night has never, not for a single moment, stopped whispering. The whisper that began in that Himalayan cave does not dissipate into silence, it accumulates, it deepens, it finds new throats through which to speak. Every Kriyaban who sits in the pre-dawn dark, spine erect, breath suspended in the ancient technique, becomes a living relay station for a transmission that Babaji himself encoded into the very structure of the practice. The cave at Raniket is everywhere such a person sits. Yogananda understood this with a precision that went far beyond sentiment. In the final years of his life, as he completed the revisions to his autobiography and oversaw the growing work of self-realization fellowship, he spoke not of an organization he was leaving behind but of a current he was rejoining. The same current that had carried Lahiri from Danapur station to the Himalayan summit, the same that had carried Yukteswar through decades of rigorous teaching in Serampore. The institution was never the point, the current was. Sri Yukteswar had trained Yogananda with a severity that puzzled onlookers but made perfect sense in retrospect. Every correction, every public rebuke delivered in that Serampore hermitage, every lesson in logic and scripture and the science of the soul was a precise calibration. Yukteswar was not building a disciple's personality but clearing the channel through which a lineage would pour itself into an entirely new civilization. The West was the destination, Yogananda was the vessel, and the shaping of that vessel had been Yukteswar's sacred work. The thread running through every meeting in this lineage, Babaji appearing to Lahiri, Lahiri transmitting to Yukteswar, Yukteswar recognizing and refining Yogananda, is not coincidence but what the yogic tradition calls the Guru Parampara, the unbroken succession. What makes the Kriya lineage singular is that the first link in that chain is not historical but living, not a venerated founder sealed in the amber of the past but a walking, breathing, body-holding Mahavatar who, by every account the tradition preserves, is still present on the physical earth. Lahiri Mahasaya himself, in his later years, would occasionally fall into states of such profound samadhi in the middle of conversations that his students sat in breathless silence, unwilling to disturb what they were witnessing. He had absorbed so much of Babaji's direct transmission, that original night of initiation, those subsequent meetings in the Himalayas, that the presence of the deathless saint seemed to move through him like light through a perfectly polished lens. Babaji had not merely given Lahiri a technique, he had restructured Lahiri's entire being. What the lineage teaches about Babaji's continued presence is not wishful mythology but a proposition grounded in the yogic understanding of the body itself. The science of Kriya, as Yogananda explains it, works by slowing the process by which the body's cells deteriorate, reversing, through the mechanics of pranayama and concentrated life force, the ordinary biological current that drives all mortals toward dissolution. Babaji has simply carried this to its logical and ultimate conclusion, a body held in perfect equilibrium, sustained by will and prana rather than the grinding machinery of ordinary metabolism. There is a quality to the Babaji stories in the autobiography that rewards multiple readings, because each encounter, whether Lahiri's first breathless recognition, or the chance sighting by Ram Gopal Muzumdar near Dasasamd Ghat, or Babaji's materialization at the Allahabad Kumbh Mela, carries a texture of precise, verifiable detail that distinguishes it from allegory. Yogananda was meticulous in recording names, dates, and the testimonies of multiple witnesses precisely because he knew that the central claim of the lineage, a deathless master who continues to walk the earth, required not faith but evidence offered with the seriousness of a scientific deposition. The Kumbh Mela appearance stands as perhaps the most startling of these documented moments. A figure recognized as Babaji moved through that vast sacred confluence, was seen and acknowledged by initiates who had encountered him before, and disappeared again into the throng of millions with the quiet ease of a man who finds eternity a rather ordinary address. The Kumbh Mela, that ancient gathering where India's spiritual rivers converge in physical space, seemed almost a fitting theater for such an appearance, a moment where time itself thins, where the boundary between the historical and the eternal becomes permeable. As this series draws toward its final movement, it is worth sitting for a moment with what the entire Babaji mystery actually asks of us, not as a devotional exercise but as a confrontational question. It asks whether the universe is capable of containing what the yogic tradition insists it contains, a consciousness so fully merged with the infinite that the ordinary physical laws of entropy no longer apply to it. A saint who did not merely transcend death as a future event but has transcended it as an ongoing condition, second by second, century by century, in a body that continues to walk among mountains. To sit with that question honestly, not to dismiss it, not to rush into credulous acceptance, but to hold it with the same rigor and the same openness that Yukteswar demanded of Yogananda in that Serampore hermitage, is perhaps the most faithful thing a modern seeker can do with this lineage's extraordinary gift. The deathless saint does not ask for your belief. He asks, through every syllable of this transmission, whether you are willing to practice, to verify, to go far enough along the inner Himalayan path that you might one day encounter, in whatever form the encounter takes, the whisper that has never stopped. And so we arrive at the threshold of the final question, not the question of whether Babaji exists, but the question of what kind of universe we are actually living in, and whether we have the courage to take that universe seriously on its own deepest terms. The Kriya Yoga lineage does not ask its students to believe in miracles as a condition of entry, it asks them to become, through dedicated practice, the kind of instrument through which miracles can be understood from the inside, as natural laws operating at a frequency the untrained mind simply cannot yet read. Yogananda wrote in the Autobiography that the great masters do not perform wonders to astonish, they perform them, when they perform them at all, to demonstrate the latent possibilities sleeping inside every human being, possibilities that the lineage from Babaji downward through Lahiri and Yukteswar exists precisely to awaken. Lahiri Mahasaya, the householder saint of Varanasi, is perhaps the lineage's most quietly revolutionary figure, a man who wore the clothes of an ordinary government accountant while carrying in his chest a fire that Babaji himself had personally kindled on the slopes of the Himalayas, and who proved by living that no outer renunciation is required to touch the infinite. Sri Yukteswar, that rigorous and tender leonine master of Serampore, took Lahiri's flame and added to it a crystalline intellectual precision, his holy science a bridge between East and West, between the Sankhya cosmology of ancient India and the intuitive knowledge that the new century would desperately need, a bridge Babaji had apparently commissioned him to build. Yogananda carried that flame across the ocean, into lecture halls and ashrams and the pages of a book that would find its way into the hands of millions of ordinary seekers who had never heard of Kriya Yoga and who would, upon reading it, feel something stir in them that they could not name but could not ignore. What the lineage transmits is not merely a technique, though Kriya Yoga as Yogananda described it, that ancient pranayama by which the life force is made to travel the spinal highway of the subtle body, is a precise and transformative instrument. It transmits above all a certainty, earned not borrowed, that the self behind the breath is deathless. Babaji's continued physical existence, as the lineage presents it, is not a claim designed to inspire passive wonder, it is a living demonstration, maintained across centuries, that the endpoint of the inner journey is not metaphor, that the body itself, when the consciousness inhabiting it is fully liberated, becomes a different order of phenomenon, responsive to will rather than to entropy. Every account of Babaji in the Autobiography, the midnight materialization on the Himalayan slope, the instantaneous fire ceremony, the golden palace conjured and dissolved, the quiet commission given to Lahiri and to Yukteswar and through them to Yogananda, circles back to the same silent insistence, that what you are is not finished, that the trajectory of your consciousness does not end where the mind currently imagines it ends. The whisper that Babaji carries through the centuries, that same whisper Yogananda heard in Serampore and Calcutta and finally across the wide water of the Atlantic, is the whisper this entire series has been tracing through its 22 movements, and it says, with the patience only the deathless can afford, practice, verify, go further, I am here, I have always been here, and I am waiting. And so we arrive at the end of a journey that was never really about distance, not the miles between Varanasi and the Himalayas, not the ocean between Calcutta and Los Angeles, but the inner distance between what a human being believes itself to be and what it actually is, a distance that Babaji, Lahiri, Yukteswar, and Yogananda each crossed, and invited others to cross, one breath, one kriya, one moment of stillness at a time. The lineage did not end with Yogananda's Mahasamadhi in 1952, nor did it harden into monument or museum. It remained, as it had always been, a living transmission, a fire passed hand to hand. The same fire that Babaji kindled in a cave above Raniket and that Yogananda carried into lecture halls in Boston and temples in Encinitas. Because a flame that is truly alive does not care about the shape of the lamp that holds it. What Babaji represents in these pages, and now, at the close of these 23 movements, is not a figure belonging to Hinduism or India or to any century in particular, but rather the proof, rendered in a human form that refuses to dissolve. That consciousness at its fullest expression is not subject to the laws that govern incomplete expression, that the ceiling we call death is, from high enough, just another open sky. The gift of this entire story, from the child Yogananda weeping for the Divine Mother to the Master whose body lay incorruptible for 20 days in a Los Angeles mortuary, is that it was written not as theology but as testimony, as the honest record of a man who tested these things, who doubted and surrendered and verified, and who wanted every reader to know that the laboratory is open, that the experiment is repeatable, and that the results await anyone patient enough to sit down quietly and begin. And so the deathless saint waits still, not as legend, not as the property of any institution, but as presence, as the same unhurried whisper moving beneath the noise of every era, calling each soul forward by its own truest name, patient as only the eternal can afford to be, certain as only the already arrived can be certain, that you, too, will one day close the last remaining distance, and come home. May you find stillness amid the noise, and remember, the deepest answers always lie within.